Conquering England. The Battle of Hastings. By Barbara Davis. Chapter 1. Who will be king? On a cold January day in 1066, King Edward of England lay dying. The king had no son to replace him. 3 powerful men wanted to be the next king of England. One was Harold Godwinson. One was Duke William of Normandy. The last was Harald Hardrada of Norway. All 3 were famous warriors. All 3 were willing to wage bloody war to get what they wanted. A local leader, Harold Godwinson, was an Anglo-Saxon. He was one of the wealthiest men in England. He was also trusted and well-liked by the people. The Anglo-Saxons wanted Harold Godwinson to be England's next king. The people got their wish the day after King Edward's death, when Harold was crowned the new king of England. The Duke. In northern France, Duke William of Normandy was furious when he heard that Godwinson had been crowned king. Duke William claimed that King Edward had promised the throne to him years earlier. William decided to bring his Norman warriors to England and take the crown by force. A Viking warrior in Norway, Harald Hardrada, swore to win the English crown. He was the king of Norway and a fierce Viking warrior. Hardrada claimed that a previous English king had promised the throne to Hardrada's predecessor. Because of this, Hardrada believed that he had the right to be king of England. Chapter 2. Build up to battle. Duke William quickly began planning his invasion of England. He commanded all of his knights to bring fighting men and supplies. A knight was a professional warrior who owed his king military service. The knight's job was to fight for and protect the king. William also hired mercenaries for the battle. He promised wealth and land in England to everyone who would fight with him. William commanded shipbuilders to build a fleet of warships. These ships would transport his army across the English Channel. The shipbuilders began their work at the mouth of the Dives River in Normandy. Soon, hundreds of ships floated in the water. Waiting on the wind. William's fleet of ships faced England. His soldiers were ready to attack. But they had to postpone their plans. The wind was blowing in the wrong direction to allow passage to England. Finally, after weeks of waiting, the breeze shifted. Sails swelled with air. Knights, servants, and horses scrambled to get on the ships. Smaller boats, loaded with supplies, squeezed between the bigger warships. On September 27, 1066, William's fleet left the harbor. The ships carried more than 2,000 horses and about 10,000 soldiers, as well as many servants. Godwinson prepares for battle. Godwinson knew a battle was coming, and he had been preparing as well. Like William, he had men who owed him military service. This group was called the FYRD. Godwinson also had Huscarls to protect him. Vikings attack! While Godwinson focused on the upcoming battle with Duke William, Hardrada made his move. He landed in northern England with 7,000 Vikings. Hardrada and his men surprised the Anglo-Saxon soldiers guarding Yorkshire. The screaming Vikings attacked the Anglo-Saxons. The Anglo-Saxons fought bravely, but eventually, the Vikings claimed victory. Race to the north. Upon learning of the attack on Yorkshire, Godwinson led his army north. They marched 200 miles, 322 kilometers, in 4 days. Godwinson's forces surprised the Vikings at Stamford Bridge, near Yorkshire. The Vikings had been celebrating their victory for days. They barely had time to grab their weapons before the Anglo-Saxons attacked. Although the Vikings fought hard, the Anglo-Saxons chased them back across the bridge. During the battle, Hardrada was killed. The now leaderless Vikings retreated to their ships and left England. Another enemy arrives. On September 28, 1066, Duke William and his army sailed into Pevensey Harbour in England. The Normans expected to see Godwinson and his army ready for battle. Archers jumped into the shallow water along the beach. They were ready to protect the knights and foot soldiers getting off the ships. To William's surprise, there was no enemy army to meet them. Godwinson and his forces were still in northern England. After a few days, William moved his army north along the coast, attacking and destroying villages. He hoped Godwinson would rush back to defend his people before rebuilding a strong army. Race to the south. When news of the Normans' arrival reached Godwinson, he led his army to meet the Norman threat. Many Anglo-Saxon soldiers had been killed or injured fighting the Vikings. Godwinson needed replacements. He sent messengers to all of the towns and villages along the route south. Soon, more soldiers joined the Anglo-Saxon forces. Godwinson's strategy. Godwinson waited for the Normans on top of Senlac Hill, 6 miles, 10 kilometers, north of Hastings. This position would force the Normans to fight uphill. Godwinson had about 7,000 men. These warriors fought on foot using swords, battle axes, and lances. They formed lines several rows deep across the ridge. The most experienced fighters were in the front. The rest of the army waited behind them. Godwinson was ready to fight right alongside his men. Duke William's strategy. Duke William split his army into 3 sections. In each section, the archers stood in front. Foot soldiers were in the middle. Knights were in the back. Unlike the Anglo-Saxons, Norman knights fought on horseback. Their horses were trained for battle. Knights could quickly get close to the enemy and then speed away. William was depending on his mounted knights to help win the battle. Chapter 3. Battle to the death. Finally, both sides met at Senlac Hill. The Normans looked up at their opponents from the bottom of the ridge. The Anglo-Saxons glared down from the top. At Godwinson's command, the front row of Anglo-Saxon warriors brought up their shields. The edges of the shields overlapped. The result was a long wall of strong shields. The eager Anglo-Saxons began hitting their weapons against their shields. The Normans added the blare of brass horns to the noise. Anglo-Saxon warriors roared insults at the Norman forces. Normans shouted insults back. War horses stomped at the ground and whinnied. Battle fever had taken hold. Suddenly, Norman arrows whistled toward the Anglo-Saxons. The battle had begun. Up against the shield wall. William thought the storm of arrows would injure many of the Anglo-Saxons. But the Norman archers were firing uphill and from too far away. Most of their arrows thudded into the strong Anglo-Saxon shields. William ordered the foot soldiers to advance. The Norman foot soldiers ran toward the Anglo-Saxons. Once the Normans got close, the Anglo-Saxons threw rocks, battle axes, and spears at them. The Normans threw themselves against the Anglo-Saxon shields. They thrust their swords into any openings they could find in the shield wall. The Anglo-Saxons swung their weapons with deadly force. Their battle axes easily sliced through Norman helmets and armor. Thundering hooves. William's foot soldiers could not break through the shield wall. He sent his mounted knights to charge against the Anglo-Saxon line. Most Anglo-Saxon warriors had little experience with war horses. The sight of these huge beasts charging at them was terrifying. The ground shook from the horses' pounding hooves. Still, the brave Anglo-Saxons held the shield wall together. One final push. As the day went on, the armies continued fighting. The Anglo-Saxons held their line. The Normans were getting tired. William rallied all of his fighters for one final push. If this advance failed, William knew the Anglo-Saxons would claim victory. William sent his archers up the hill to collect the arrows they had fired at the beginning of the battle. Once again, the archers fired their arrows. This time, though, they were closer to the Anglo-Saxons. The Normans' arrows fell like deadly rain onto the Anglo-Saxons. One arrow struck Godwinson above his eye. At one end of the shield wall, the Norman forces acted as though they were retreating. Believing the Normans were fleeing, some Anglo-Saxon warriors broke away from the shield wall. Yelling and swinging their battle axes, they chased the Normans down the hill. This created a gap in the shield wall. The Normans took advantage of the opening in the shield wall. Norman knights drove their horses through the Anglo-Saxon lines. They wanted to kill Godwinson. According to some sources, Godwinson died instantly from his arrow wound. According to others, he was just wounded. The Huscarls then tried to protect Godwinson from the Norman knights. They fought bravely. But, one by one, the Huscarls were killed. When the Normans reached Godwinson, they attacked. In minutes, the king lay dead. No one knows which account is true. Godwinson's death shook the spirit of the remaining Anglo-Saxons. Many of the nobles and the Huscarls fell to the Normans. Soon, there was no one to command the FYRD soldiers. Not knowing what to do, the soldiers in the FYRD fled from the bloody battlefield. Chapter 4. England's New King. Life changed forever for the Anglo-Saxon people after the Battle of Hastings. William was crowned King of England on December 25, 1066. He wasted no time forcing his will on the Anglo-Saxons. Many Anglo-Saxon nobles had died in the Battle of Hastings. William gave their land to Norman knights. The Anglo-Saxons faced challenges to their language and customs as well. The Anglo-Saxons spoke English, but the Normans spoke French. As a result, French became the language spoken in government meetings and in churches. The Normans also brought a new system of government to England. Under this system, the king had more power than before. The new Norman nobles owed their land and possessions to the king. Because of this, King William expected loyalty and support for all of his decisions. A few groups of Anglo-Saxons formed small armies of resistance and struck at the Normans whenever they could. William spent years crushing this resistance. Yet William did have a certain respect for the Anglo-Saxon people. He ordered the building of Battle Abbey so people would remember the Battle of Hastings. He wanted to honor the worthy opponents his army had fought. William ordered the altar in the abbey to be built on the exact spot where Godwinson had died.